All right, welcome, welcome. If you're new here, I'm so glad you're joining us. I really do hope you find this to be a good use of your time. For those that are returning, I love seeing all of your faces. I say this every week, and it's truer every week. This is the highlight of my week, seeing people that are really engaged in their role that want to just come keep learning and learning and learning. And I love that, and it just makes me smile every Friday. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to comment, like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more videos on legal technology talk. So, today we're going to talk about something every single law firm deals with. This is unqualified leads and them making it into the conference room. People who should have been screened and weeded out earlier. People who will not move forward, people who do not fit your services, ideal client, or do not have the legal authority to plan on behalf of another person. It slows down the firm, it frustrates the attorneys, and it drains hours, days, weeks, months of valuable time in the conference room. So today's topic is very simple. Intake team and client service coordinators, fix your intake. Stop sending unqualified leads into the conference room. And I've said this since I was a client service coordinator in an estate planning law firm. You want to send people into the conference room on a silver platter for the attorney that are ready to have their goals met and their problems solved and sign an engagement agreement. So before we fix the problem, we need to understand why this issue matters so much. So why sending unqualified leads into the conference room is harmful to the firm. Um, we're going to first talk about the cost of the problem. Pardon me. When you allow unqualified leads into the conference room, your firm loses money every time. Not in theory, but in real, actual paper dollars. So picture your attorney or whoever's doing the consultations. It's not always an attorney. They walk in ready to help. They block off an hour, maybe more. They prepare mentally for the consult. They're ready to deliver real solutions and value. And they have their head and heart in the game. But within the first few minutes, it becomes very clear that the person isn't qualified to be there, or has no power of attorney for the person they want to plan for, or needs a service your firm does not provide, or is outside your financial model, or is looking for something you legally cannot offer, or is just not an ideal client that your firm works with. That hour is gone. Even if it's a 5 hour meeting, yeah, they can go review drafts, things like that. But that hour is gone. You cannot bill it, you cannot recover it, and you cannot redirect it. You can't fill that slot. It's already started. If that person's time is worth, let's say, $400 an hour, so specifically probably an attorney, that consult costs you $400. If this happens 2 or 3 times a week, that is $5,000 to $6,000 a month in wasted attorney time. Over a year, you can lose more than $60,000 simply because the wrong questions were not asked at intake. And let's say that you do charge $400 for every consult. Before they come in, they have to pay $400 to speak to the attorney for that hour. Great. But you know that the bread and butter comes from the plans they sign up for after the consultation, not the small consult fees. So big deal that you collected 400. You're not engaging people for the plans that are thousands of dollars that pay the bills. So that is a huge cost, even if you are collecting fees for the consultations. There are other costs too. It disrupts the attorney's day. It lowers morale. It creates friction. And this is a very real one. It creates friction between attorneys and the intake team or client service coordinators. There starts getting animosity in either direction because this keeps happening. And it steals time that could have gone to the clients you actually want and who will engage your firm. So everything we're talking about today is designed to stop that from happening and stopping the bleeding. I will say, if you want help reducing these wasted hours and tightening your intake pipeline, you can always schedule a free discovery meeting with us from our website. Beth, do you have any comments on this section before I start getting into the solutions?
I think you're pretty good. I will have
Awesome.
more.
All right. So now that we understand why it matters, the first step in defining is defining who truly belongs in that conference room. And that's going to bring us to your ideal client profile. So you need to know who you serve and tie it to your ideal client profile. And I'm just going to preface this all. You need to know who your ideal client is. If you don't have that on paper and everybody in your firm knows who your ideal client is, you need to do that. And when I say ideal client profile, I'm just referring to that list that you have of your ideal client to come into the firm. So intake cannot qualify anyone if the firm does not know who it serves, and even further, who it wants to serve. This is why every firm needs a crystal clear ideal client profile. This is your target, your filter. This is your North Star. You're always looking in that direction through your marketing, your workshops, your intake, your consultations. Your ideal client profile tells the intake team, and part. All right, there we go. I had to cough. Sorry. It tells your intake team what services you offer, what services you do not offer, what level of complexity you accept. An example of that is, do you take contested wills, contested probates, for personal representatives in a probate? That's the complexity I'm talking about. And then what financial model aligns with your fees? Do you have a specific demographic that is your ideal client? Everybody wants the $10 million client. We get that. But what is your ideal client that is coming in, engaging, you have a history of, and you serve well and pays the bills? Next is what authority or decision making power you require. And then what outcome the client must want to achieve. When you do not have this written down, crystal clear, your intake team is forced to guess. They listen to the caller and try to make judgment calls based on instinct or what they vaguely remember. And that is how the wrong people get scheduled. You must have a clear intake laid out for the team to follow and let it guide you through the process of vetting and qualifying leads. Remember your North Star. When your ideal client profile is clear, intake knows exactly what qualifies and what does not. They don't have to guess. They filter. They say yes or no with confidence because they're matching the caller against a real set of criteria, not a gut feeling. Of course, there are some that are on the fence. They're kind of fit your profile, kind of don't, and they must be filtered through an attorney if they want to take the client or not. I'm going to say not everybody is a definitive yes or no, but remember that that's an exception, not the rule. So let me give you a real example. A firm we've worked with kept booking contested probates into the conference room for a consultation. This firm does not do contested probates ever. It was wasted consultation after consultation. Some trigger questions were put into place to catch those before they were ever able to schedule, and the problem was fixed. It was a simple question just added to the intake. Once we created their ideal client profile with them, everything changed. Intake suddenly had confidence. They weren't guessing anymore. They knew who they served and they knew who they didn't serve. They could identify bad fits in seconds. This profile is what your red flag questions and trigger questions plug into. It tells you exactly what matters. I am going to say, if you want help building your ideal client profile inside your CRM, so intake sees it every day, schedule that meeting with us on our website, because it is not a list. It's a set of questions that honor the ideal client profile list. So the profile is the list. The intake is honoring that list in a much more conversational manner. And no one gets through that shouldn't when the questions are phrased and set correctly on the intake forms to honor the ideal client profile. All right, Beth, before we get into red flag questions, anything on this one?
Yeah, and I want to address Ashley's question. She asked, what if we follow the intake process properly? So there's two ways to that. One is if your intake is set up correctly, which is what John is talking about, and you follow it properly, then you shouldn't be getting people in there. And if they are still sneaking through, then you need to readjust that intake process. Um, okay. So if we ask the right question, they failed to disclose information till the meeting. There's really not a lot of control you have over people lying. And there's really not a lot you can do with that. So you can get that you can get people that'll get through there. And no, that would not be on you. That would be on them. And if they come in there and they waste that time, um, then that's on them. They've wasted their own time. And yeah, you've wasted some attorney time and everything else. But here's the thing, don't take that on that that's your fault, but take that on as okay, this person lied to me and I didn't catch it and they got through. So now how do I stop that? How can I figure out that they're lying to me? Is there another way to ask that question? Is there another way to, get that information from them? And a lot of times that really is the phrasing of the questions. And you can reevaluate those. Like asking somebody, and just let's just continue on that conflict for a probate. If you ask somebody, hey, do you have any conflicts with other people that are involved in this? And they'll be like, no. Maybe you change that to say, can you tell me about the relationships of these, with these people that are involved or whatever else. So you start to pull that out and then they'll go, oh yeah, Amy is absolutely ridiculous. She fights everybody on everything. Well, then right there, you're like, huh, you told me there wasn't a conflict, but now we know that Amy could be a problem. And sorry if your name's Amy, but but yeah, so that is it's not a failure on your part when you set up your intake, but it may need to be reevaluated and say, hey, is there a way that we can make this so we can filter them out a little better?
And I have a
Yep.
really good example of that. A lot of people want to know the net worth of somebody before they come into the consultation. First of all, you would probably get that on your form that you send them before the consultation. But to get through the intake screening process, through the many, 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 many years I've coached on this and done it myself, there is a difference between saying, what is your net worth right now? That is too blunt and it's very personal. And is how I've learned to rephrase that. And then I'm getting a more honest answer for two reasons. It feels more casual. And by what I'm going to show you in this question, um, is they can't do the math fast enough in their head to lie about it. So is how I always phrase that is if you just look at your bank accounts, your cars, your house, your stocks, what would you guess that all of that is worth together? And then they're going to say, oh, it's about 1.2 million because they have done that in their head before. So you're triggering something they already know, and they're not going to sit in their head and say, "Oh, I don't want them to know this." So they're not going to do that. So that's what we're talking about in rephrasing questions, and we can absolutely help you with those types of things as well when we're helping you with your intake process. Okay. So now let's go on to point two. We're going to talk about red flag questions and trigger questions. These are the two things that are the guardrails and the gatekeepers of the attorney's conference room. Once you know who you serve, the next step is asking the questions that reveal, excuse me, whether each caller fits your ideal client profile. This is where red flag questions and trigger questions come in. So just to be clear, red flag questions are questions that raise red flags quickly if you should take the client. Trigger questions are questions that trigger digging deeper for various reasons during the intake. So this is the heart of your qualification process. Um, and I want to also be clear that this doesn't mean make your intake 45 minutes on the phone. It can still be 5 to 10 minutes in how you do these. If you make these questions smartly, you're going to get the answers that you need quickly. So, flag questions. These identify obvious misalignments with your ideal client profile. They quickly signal when someone is not a good fit. They are the, well, red flags. So, some examples of those. What service are you trying to accomplish? Why are you calling us? If they say DUI and you only do estate planning, instantly, there you go. You know you can't take them. Which state, country, county, or jurisdiction are you located in? This is a quick answer. If they're calling about a guardianship and you only do guardianship in this county but not this county, instantly you know we can help them. We can't. Let's continue to see if they're still a good fit. Are there any urgent deadlines? Yeah, I'm going on vacation tomorrow and I need my power of attorney because if something happens, I need one for my child or something. Um, yeah, we can't help you by tomorrow. So now you know you're not a good fit for this case, not necessarily for the legal situation. Has anyone already taken legal action? This is really big on Medicaid if you do that. Did they sell their house yesterday? Have they already applied for Medicaid? These are all things that you should have in your ideal client profile of what you're willing to assist with and what you're not. Are there disputes or conflicts? And this is what Beth talked about earlier. What expectations do you have about cost or outcome? Now, this is just the type of questions and clarifications. I'm not saying ask the client what expectations do you have about costs? No, we're going to talk about that in a minute, but you're not going to ask them their expectations on cost. You're going to tell them on that, and then you'll get their response. These questions do not feel confrontational. They simply reveal whether this is your client or not. Trigger questions go deeper. They help you confirm whether the caller maybe has the authority, capacity, or readiness to move forward, or if it's going to be contested, things like that. Those are going to be things that are going to need you to dive a little deeper with. Some of the questions, they could go into competency. Are you planning for yourself or someone else? This is one of the biggest missed questions in an intake. Because if they say for ourselves and their spouse, it is okay to say in a joking manner that is conversational, so it's not offensive. So I assume that you both are able to make legal and financial decisions on your own behalf, right? Ha ha ha. And they're like, oh, of course. But you're testing that. But if they say I'm planning for someone else, that's triggering you to dig deeper. Do they have the power of attorney to do that? Do they have the guardianship to do that? And if someone else, it's just that. Do you have the authority to do that? Does the person have the capacity to make legal and financial decisions on their own with no assistance? Do you have, and I'm not saying you're going to be the doctor. I'm just saying you're covering your bases to say you asked that question and they answered it, we're fine, or we have the authority to do this. Do you have access to their information and assets legally if you're planning to for someone else? Are you the primary decision maker? Is anyone preventing access or blocking decisions? That's a really great way to ask in a contested way if somebody is going to fight against what you're trying to do. Here's the impact of missing these. A daughter calls wanting to plan for her mother with dementia. Intake books the consult, but she has no power of attorney. The attorney walks in and discovers they cannot legally do anything. 90 minutes wasted instantly. The meeting might have only lasted 5 minutes, but that entire time slot is down the drain. Maybe it's the brother who has the POA or guardianship, and that discussion during intake could have solved that. The brother could have scheduled, and the meeting could have moved forward with an engagement agreement over just one simple question. And I think that kind of goes to what Ashley was talking about, is you're not at fault for what you're given to ask, but then I would encourage you to be the rock star of your role and say, how can we avoid this in the future? And bring it up in a team meeting and brainstorm that. Red flag questions filter the caller. They trigger questions confirm authority and capacity. So if you want us to help build those questions right into your Lawmatics intake flow, schedule that meeting with us. We can help you do that. And if you don't have an ideal client profile, we can help you do that. We know how to ask you the right questions to get that information out to build that profile. It can take you through the intake and stop you when it's not an ideal client or other scenarios that do not work for your law firm. Remember, intake is a science. You never wing an intake. It's a true science, and there is a method to the madness. Any comments on this one, Beth? This is a kind of a big chunk of the topic.
Right, it is. And it's the most important part of it. Um, the the biggest the biggest impact that this really has is that at building these questions and all of this stuff into your intake takes that pressure off of your intake person, the person taking that phone call, and the person talking to that person. Because now you're quantifying things and you're quantifying those through those questions. So it takes it off of that where it's not your opinion anymore. It is actual quantifiable numbers that you can say, yes, this person doesn't have the authority or whatever else, instead of just trying to read between the lines of what they're telling you. And that really helps intake a lot and takes the pressure off. So it's not your fault.
And Beth, just speak for a second to your experience because Beth used to do the first consultation in our law firm. And I was the client service director, and I had a couple people under me. And we would sometimes send unqualified leads through. They would slip through. And what was your thoughts when that happened?
Yeah, so when that happened, it makes it very hard in there, especially if you figure out in the very beginning that like this isn't something we can help them with. They're not the right person to be talking to, whatever. And once you have somebody in that conference room, they come in there with an expectation. Like, because not only have they made it through that intake process, but we've also sent them confirmation emails that tell them what's going to happen in that meeting. And they've filled in information and like they've done all this stuff. They come into that meeting with an expectation that they're going to be discussing this stuff. And now we get in there and we're like, well, you don't have the authority. Like, we can't we can't do anything. And now that leaves a really bad taste in their mouth where if they would have been told at the beginning that okay, if your brother has power of attorney, your brother needs to be at this meeting. Like this meeting needs to be with your brother, not with you. Um, and that really, they may not want to hear that in the beginning, but it stops them from getting in the conference room and then whoever is in there holding that meeting needing to tell them, hey, I really can't help you because you made it this far and you shouldn't have. Obviously, you don't say that to them, but that is really the reality of it is. And I will say that that did not happen very often. John was very good about weeding those people out before they got there. And
Yeah.
I'll
And you
talk
can have
more
other
about that after your next one.
yeah, and you can have other structures in place. The intake to a workshop. The workshop should be another educational yet weeding tool. You're going to say things that are going to say, you know what, they're not a good fit for us. I'm not going to schedule a meeting. That's another way to do it with one more filter. But one that I am going to touch on, and I made a note to touch on this, that it happens, it's touchy, and it feels a little embarrassing to talk about with somebody is when they get into the conference room and they're renting an apartment, they're on government assistance to pay for that apartment. They don't own a car, they take a bus, and they don't have a bank account. There's no way they could afford the services. So, how do you structure that into your intake? I'm going to say it because you are weeding them out, but your intake team should be well versed in handling those situations by asking the right questions. Those should be embedded, but then saying, but there is a program at the Office on Aging, Department of Health and Human Services. They actually do free wells and they would be able to assist you. I'm going to give you their phone number. So offering those resources because they know they don't have the money. And it is hard to talk about, but you're not throwing them out to the wolves. You're also giving them a resource that can help them. So, structuring your intake questions, such as, like I said, if you were to count your house, your car, your bank accounts, your stocks, your bonds, what would be the full value of all that? And they're like, well, I don't have anything. I have $5 in my pocket. Okay, well, I'm going to give you a resource that can assist you with still doing your will or something like that.
Right. And
Uh,
and when we're talking about the workshop too as well, that is a good way if you're doing workshops or seminars. A good way to be weeding those out is not to give actual prices, but to give price ranges. If your base will plan starts at $1,500, saying that in there that says, it's 15, our prices range from 1,500 to 20,000. The person that's sitting there with $5 in their pocket is going to very quickly go, yeah, that's not for me. So it is going to weed them out at that point. And a lot of people are really against, they don't want to say that there. They don't want to scare people off with that. Well, it doesn't scare people off because then those are the people you want to quote unquote scare off, because you don't want to be taking up attorney time when they're not going to be moving forward at all.
yeah, I love that. And I actually have a
Yep.
section here talking specifically about the pricing.
Yep.
Okay, so now that you know how to develop the right questions, or you at least have the resources where you can talk to us, or you have a guideline of how to develop the right questions, the next step is making sure intake uses them consistently. And this is where structure matters. Using an intake funnel, you cannot rely on memory. I will talk from personal experience. I will think I'm going to say something in one
Hmm.
of these open coachings, and as soon as I open my mouth, it doesn't come out because I forgot what I was going to say. So we all have brains like that. Some are actually, I'm not going to say all. Some of you have the most incredible memories I've ever seen. Um, you, but you don't want to rely on memory. You cannot rely on instinct. You need to rely on a structured intake form that walks your team through the process every single time. Every client gets the same experience every time. That's why they refer people. They liked your process, so they're going to refer somebody to get that same process. Conditional forms are the most ideal that will guide an intake person through the process. Conditional forms, it just means that if you say, are you planning for you or somebody else? And you say somebody else, a conditional form will pop up another section that helps you dive deeper. It's going to guide you through those deep dives or not needing. If it lets you bypass it, then the question was accepted. So intake forms are really, really cool, and they're not even that modern of a technology. So if you're not using conditional forms in your intake, schedule a discovery with us because it's going to make your life 10 times easier. But for a structure, this is what it might look like. Stage one is rapport. Begin with warmth, build trust. Where did you hear about us? Get basic info and their story of why they're calling. Some people call it an initial inquiry, things like that. I like to call it their story. You have a space that while they're telling you why they're calling, you're just typing away in non sentence format in your own jargon and way you type to get their story down of why they're calling, because that is going to give you the basis of how you're going to move forward. Stage two is explain the process. Before we talk about scheduling into a consultation or a workshop, I just need to ask a few questions. This sets the expectation. Some people will even say this is going to take 5 to 10 minutes. Um, the more expectations you set, the less frustrations and questions you get later. Stage three is red flag questions. Check alignment with your ideal client profile. Stage four is the trigger questions. And I put red flag questions first because that's going to be an instant weeding out. That's the fastest. And that's what you want to do. You want to work your way down. They're qualified, and you're just getting a little deeper. So stage four is trigger questions. Confirm their authority to do whatever legal service they're trying to do, capacity, and readiness. If you hear something, yeah, we're just kind of looking around. We've thought about doing our will, so we thought we'd start talking to some attorneys. That's a trigger question. Do you want to put somebody that is just kind of in the initial thinking, um, or do you have an amazing attorney that can show the urgency, the importance, and can really help these people say, we're the right ones. It's time to do this for yourself and your family. Um, and then stage five is the decision point. Either this caller qualifies or they do not by this point. The team should know by now. If they have made it this far, you're most likely ready to schedule them on the calendar or know how you need to handle this potential client. I am going to say, if they're going into a workshop, um, by the time you start talking about consultation, you can tell them right away, we have consultations or we have workshops. Kind of once you get through some of this, um, our consultation is $400, but if you go to our workshop and take the time to get some education, we're going to waive that fee when you come into the consultation. Then you can use that as a weeding process in the workshop. So you don't need as much detail if they're going into a workshop. Um, so you're just seeing if they're likely ready to schedule or not. And you should know by now how you want to handle this potential client's game plan forward. And then stage six, schedule or redirect. Book the meeting or offer a referral. Remember, though, when you refer out, have a list of trusted referrals approved by the attorney. When you refer, that person you're referring to is also a reflection of the firm as you are referring people to them. Don't just pick someone in the phone book. Do it smartly because then they could say, you know what? I loved that calling them for intake. They were very helpful. They referred me to somebody, but if they trust this person that they referred me to, I want nothing to do with that other law firm because that's scary that they trust them. So have a list of approved referrals. And if you don't know, the state bar is always a good place to refer. And again, we can help you build these funnels into your CRM with the conditional forms. So intake never misses questions. You can schedule that meeting with us to build it into your Lawmatics. So the last piece is mindset, because even with structure, intake has to understand the purpose behind it. So train your intake team to guard the conference room. Your intake team must understand their true role. They are not just schedulers. They are guardians of the galaxy. No, they're guardians of the attorney's time. But they are the guardians of the galaxy, which is the law firm. So picture the attorney again. They walk into the conference room at 2 in the afternoon. They block the time. They prepare. They're ready. The person has no legal authority or wants a service you do not offer, or cannot sign documents because of competency or lack of authority to do so, or is completely outside your ideal client profile. That moment, in here I said should never happen again after what we're talking about right now. And I say that because you always want to set a perfect expectation, but we understand there will be some that slip through, just like Ashley had talked about. But it should never be the norm. When intake sees themselves as gatekeepers, everything changes. Um, they start using red flag questions with confidence. They use trigger questions without hesitation. They state pricing or price ranges without being embarrassed because they know that the service's value is worth those costs. They feel empowered to decline or redirect when something does not line up. You can give them this phrase. We're going to ask a few questions to make sure we can assist you in your legal needs and make sure that we're a good fit for you. Always make it about the client because remember, if you put them in the conference room and they are not qualified, it's frustrating for the firm, but you also wasted that person's time, the potential client. So if you put yourself in their shoes, it's going to help you a lot as well. Clients respect it, attorneys appreciate it. Intake becomes a high performing filter that protects the entire firm. Confidence, confidence, confidence. When the intake team sounds shaky, trust goes out the window. And we can help training in your mindset. We train on intake. Um, Pricing is the biggest one. I remember this in workshops. People would say, "So what's the price?" If you say, "Well, it's it's based on who, services we offer. We'd have to have you come in." Those days are gone, because it looks like you're hiding something. Or if you say, "Well, they start at $1,500, you look embarrassed by your pricing. They're going to say, "Oh, does their service suck? Is that why they're not confident in their pricing?" But when they say, "What is your pricing?" I can't give you an exact price for the plan you're going to do, but I can tell you our plans start at $1,500, which will get you a base will, both power or your powers of attorney, medical powers of attorney, and your living will. And it can go up to 20,000. That's tax planning and all these different things with asset protection. But we start at 1,500. You're confident, but you're being legally sound by not quoting prices when they're asking, because you are not an attorney to tell them what plans they need. So now let's finish with the key takeaways. And Beth, I'm going to let you say if you have anything on that, guarding the conference room before we start wrapping up.
Yeah, and that is a thing I see a lot in some firms is that some firms will even call their intake scheduling. Like, and that is not their only job. Like they have a much bigger role than that. It is not just getting people in and getting them to the into that conference room. And one thing that we have in our report is we have, intake or client services conversion rates, like how many people call, how many they get in the conference room. The goal of that is not necessarily to have a high conversion rate, because that conversion rate isn't just a reflection on the client services. That is a reflection really into your marketing and getting the right people in there that contact intake in the first place to get them through to the conference room. And so if somebody's conversion rate is 50% of people that call that they actually get scheduled into a consultation, that might be a good thing because you can't look at just one number and say this is what it is. Because if you look at that 50% and then you go look at all of them and they were all referred out, refused client, not qualified. They were there was conflicts, there was like all of this other stuff. Like there's reasons behind that. It's not that they were the ideal client that got into there. And some firms are tracking that to where they're only running that number off of people who are qualified. And there's sets of criteria that say yes, this person is qualified, or no, this person isn't qualified. So yeah, my caution in that is that yes, this is intake's job, and please, if you're intake, take that and accept that job. But make sure that it's also clear to everyone else what that uh job and what those responsibilities actually are.
Yep, absolutely. And I always like to throw in whenever we're talking about intake and client services, when you're hiring or when you were hired, is what we like to always say is you can train the skills. You can't train a personality. Everything with intake and client service coordinators is relationship based. When you pick up the call and you say, "Thank you for calling Jones Law Firm," instantly they're like, "Oh, I'm interrupting them." So the personality will always be the most important thing. And I can almost guarantee you were hired because of your personality for your seat. So let that shine, let that come through. You're the warmth, you're the fuzzy, good feeling part, but you have it hard because you also have to balance this gatekeeping, but you have to be the relationship person in your firm. All right. So now we're going to start wrapping up with once we've gone through these, and I debated putting this at the front or the end, and I chose the end so you can think about what we've talked about. This is the four most missed things in an intake. And I want to give you something really, really practical. These are the four things that intake teams miss more than anything else. These are the holes that waste attorney time, clutter your schedule, and let unqualified leads slip through. So if you write these four things down, you're going to start seeing your this problem start to be solved instantly just by having these things in front of you. The first thing is the authority. The number one thing intake team forgets to confirm is the caller legally allowed to make decisions? Do they have a power or guardianship, a power of attorney or guardianship? Are they planning for themselves? Missing this one question can waste an entire meeting over and over and over again. The next one is the simple competency test. Can the person who needs to plan actually sign documents? Can they make legal and financial decisions on their own without assistance? Are there cognitive concerns? Are there medical limitations? This is a trigger question that protects the attorney and the potential client. I'm going to give you a scenario on this that you hear a lot actually, is the daughter calls and she's not in good graces with her mother. They don't get along. The mother took her out of the will. The daughter's like, I need to fix that. She calls and says that she has the authority and she mocks something up. And she gets through and she changes the will. Can that be solved later in courts? Absolutely. But you can stop that now by getting to that trigger question saying, oh, do you have a power of attorney? Yes. Perfect. Send that over to us. We need to review that before the consultation. And the attorney, I can guarantee, is going to spot if they've done something weird very quickly. Number three is the financial fit. Intake hesitates to mention pricing. They're afraid to scare the client away. That's exactly what Beth just said. But when intake avoids price ranges, you end up booking consults for clients who cannot move forward at all because of pricing. Clients respect transparency. They lose trust when intake sounds shaky, unconfident, or uncertain. The days of secrecy are coming to an end for law firms. It's okay to say your starting price. This means if they come in, they can afford at least your base plans to get them started. And then the fourth is actual services needed. Clients often ask for the wrong thing. They ask for a will when really they need a probate because they don't know the terminology. They ask for Medicaid planning when you only do litigation. Intake must clarify the true services needed, not the one the client guessed. Knowledge of your service is vital for the intake team. If you do workshops, I encourage the intake team, and it's what I did, to attend 1,400 workshops because it's going to be drilled into your brain of what services you offer, especially if you've never worked in a law firm. Go to these workshops, and I encourage office managers, attorneys, to allow them to do this and attend those just to listen over and over. These four things are missed constantly, and they are the exact issues that cause wasted meetings. So I am going to say, if your CRM and intake scripts do not guide your team through these four areas, schedule a discovery meeting with us, and we will help you build it in. You'll see an instant increase in qualified leads going into the conference room and much more engagements. So let's bring everything together with the key takeaways. What I want you to walk away today with is knowing that unqualified consults waste time and cost real cash money. Know exactly who you serve and focus on your ideal client profile. Build a clear ideal client profile. Use red flag questions to filter callers early. Use trigger questions to confirm authority, capacity, and readiness. Never skip the four most missed areas: authority, competency, financial fit, and actual services needed. Structure your intake funnel for consistency and always offering amazing customer service. Train intake to guard the conference room and protect attorney time. And this one's last because I really want it to stick in your brains. Use your CRM to enforce these steps so nothing gets missed. You could have all of this in place and it's amazing, but you have nothing to enforce it. So if you do want help setting up your ideal client profile, creating your red flag or trigger questions into your CRM, or building a clear automated intake funnel in your Lawmatics system that is built smartly. Remember, it's a science. It's not just willy-nilly. Or maybe you're not happy with your current CRM because it can't do this and you want to explore options, go to our website, schedule a free discovery meeting with us. We'd love to help your firm with this. On the note sheet on the very bottom, there is a link right there that you can click to schedule the discovery as well. So I'm going to let Beth give her comments and then we'll go into Q&A.
Okay, so I'm gonna answer Ashley's question here. She said about we give them an option to book online if they're still undecided. Is that a common option to have? Yes, it is, and it's very good. So a couple ways that firms are fixing issues around this is they're doing one of two things. They're building out their intake, and that is very important to build out your intake for your qualifying questions to be able to filter those out before. Sometimes they're doing an expanded intake where you have someone who is really just scheduling an expanded intake, which is a 15-minute whatever meeting with someone. That is not an attorney. That is just, and that is not generally in small firms. Those are in larger firms where you have your receptionist who's taking those calls. They're scheduling these expanded intakes with someone who can ask those more detailed questions and weed them out at that point. You should not be offering them to be able to book online unless they're qualified. And in some cases, there are actually people who, and these are all options, and I'm just throwing this all out there as options. There are firms who build qualifying questions into their forms online. So like they will have a list of services and say, here's what can we help you with? And they'll have a whole bunch of services in there. And if somebody says real estate, where it can pop up, and instead of them being able to book a consultation, it says, "I'm sorry, this is an area of law we don't cover, but here's a resource for you. Here is someone we trust to work with, whatever else," and it gives that information so that your online form is actually filtering out people before they get to you. Um, so like those are all different kind of options, but coming from an intake and then giving someone that option to book online shouldn't happen unless they're qualified to begin with. Um, yeah, and so one of the I told you that I would show you an intake form and a demonstration of what building out an intake form to do this does. So this is a sample of that. So what can we help you with? If this person says estate planning, it'll of course ask how'd you hear about it? So we can absolutely help you. Let me get some more information, determine how we can best meet your needs. Are you calling for yourself or someone else? Well, if I'm calling for myself, great. We fill in the information. Are they calling for someone else? What is your relationship to the person you're calling about? Um, and then does this person have the ability to make legal decisions? If that's a yes, great. If that's a no, then it's do you have the power of attorney for this person? If that's a yes, yep, will you be the primary contact for communication? It goes on. If that is a no, it says, unfortunately, we'll need to discuss this with the person who holds the power of attorney. Will they be able to attend the consultation? So that's an example of how you can make these forms interactive and go down through. And it goes all the way down through and ask a whole bunch of different things, like what is your marital status? Are they married? Here's the spouse information. Do you have a financial advisor? And then this one built out, we have two options for estate planning clients. You can attend one of the workshops or you can have a consultation. Like you can build this in so really this is your script and that people can work their way right down through that script and get everything that they need. Okay?
I love that.
All right.
And
We have
Beth, I
five
think what
minutes for
ties into
Q&A.
this now is a little video clip.
Yeah, are you gonna stop our recording?
Yeah. All right,
Okay.
so I'm going to stop.